Now here I have a brand new box of Speer Gold Dot bullets. These are 90 grain bullets. Really, they're marketed and designed for the 380 Auto. But the 380 Auto is also the same caliber, 0.355, as the 9mm Luger. And some of our viewers were requesting that we do a test, one of our PAC-T tests, in fact, using the 90 grain 9mm Luger. So I was able to get a hold of some of these rounds, or bullets, and now it's time to load them. So what I've done also is I purchased a brand new bullet seating die. This is a Redding bullet seating die for the 9mm Luger. And you know, for a while I thought that this whole thing would be trashed, actually, because this particular seating die would not seat the bullet far enough down into the case. In fact, it had a tremendous problem giving me the correct overall length of really just over an inch. 1.01 is the overall length I was trying to achieve. And that, by the way, that overall length is what is designated in the Lyman 50th edition reloading handbook that does have a load built up for it for these 90 grain 9mm bullets. And so after consulting the Lyman reloading manual, I'm going to be using once again unique powder, starting at 5.0 grains and running all the way up to 6.3 is the max. I don't know that I'm going to go all the way to 6.3, maybe try 6.2. And I'll load these in 2 grain, or rather 2/10 of a grain increments. Now back to the seating die. The problem I was having was that the fact that this bullet is a really little bullet. I mean, not just in the weight of the bullet, but its overall length. The length of the bullet itself is pretty darn short. And that Redding die, bullet seating die, just could not do it. So I made a slight modification to the die and to the seating stem, actually, and now I'm able to seat the bullet to spec according to the reloading manual. And so it's time to get started. I have prepared a bunch of Remington Peters 9mm Luger brass, and I will be priming those in just a little bit. And I'm using Federal Premium Match Small Pistol Primers, along with my RCBS RAM. Then we'll go ahead and run those incremental powder charges, again using Unique, and then I'll top them off with the 90 grain Speer Gold Dots. And then, stick around, we'll head out to the range and fire these to see if the load workup is successful and safe. What I'm looking for is 1,300 feet per second out of the muzzle. That's a good velocity, but when you have something like a 90 grain bullet, especially if you're going to consider using that thing for personal defense, well, that's a very light projectile. Most common in the 9mm Luger is 115 grain. You're actually, as some of our previous tests have demonstrated, you're actually better off, quite a bit better off, with the 124 grain bullets. So if we step it all the way down to 90 grain, well, the only way we can compensate for the lighter weight in that projectile is to speed it up. And so I'm looking for about 1,300 feet per second. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on my reloading, putting in the primers, and then we'll head to the range. So I ended up loading 7 cases using Unique powder, starting at 5.0 grains and then working up in 0.2 grain increments, or 2/10 of a grain increments, I had planned on my 7th round throwing or using 6.2 grains of unique. Now, unique is kind of it's kind of unique. It's kind of a fluffy powder, and it can very rapidly fill a case. And of course, that also means that it can compress pretty darn easily as well. What I noticed, and another little problem that I had, was even trying to approach or use the maximum charge of 6.2 grains. So as you see, that 6.0 grains that I ended up using at my 6th round, and I actually loaded 2 of them then, using the same charge at the 7th round as well, darn near filled this case. 6.2 was almost impossible to handle the case without spilling some of the powder out. So I ended up loading 7 rounds, but they ranged from 5.0 grains all the way to 6.0 grains, round 6 and 7 being the exact same charge. Okay, so then of course I went ahead and popped those bullets in, crimped them as normal, and headed out to the range to fire these 7 rounds in a load workup. .1246. Very good. That's very nice. No problem with the primer. We're at 1246 already, looking for 1300. I think we're going to make it, but it may be a very slow incremental process. That one shot right next to the other one. Very good again, no problem. 1337 already. Oh, that's all right. Oh, now I'm hoping for 1400. Grouping pretty well. Oh, that's interesting. 1309. Round number 4. They are grouping good. .88. This one also no problem. The round 7 actually has the same powder charge in it. .1452. Wow, that's insane. It's really going. That turned out better than I actually anticipated. You know, every round fired safely, and I actually hit 1400 plus feet per second with that 90 grain bullet. Now my next step is deciding what's going to be my finished or final load. And what I've done is, looking at these results from the chronograph, I have chosen 5.8 grains of unique powder. Now the reason why I did that is, if we're looking at that curve, oftentimes what I'll do, or normally what I do, is I will add what's called a linear trend line to that XY scatter plot. And I look for shots or powder charges and the resulting velocities, and how they deviate away from that perfect linear regression line. points that fall quite a distance away from the line have what we call high residuals. There's something going on with that load, that particular load, that isn't entirely attributable to the difference in powder charge. And so we'll see that's kind of what happened with the 5.2 grain powder charge. It has a fairly high residual. The other thing that I look at are spikes or sudden jumps in velocity that might mean that the powder charge and that particular case capacity has sort of reached a new plateau, if you want to think of it that way. And from that point on, sometimes those powder charges settle out real nicely, and that's okay. But we don't like to see kind of wild variability between one round and the next, especially as the powder charge is increasing only slightly. So I was actually kind of leaning toward that 6 grain powder charge. It gave me a solid 1,400 feet per second, but on that one I ended up firing 2 of those particular loads, and they kind of followed that wild variability, which kind of made me shy away from using the 6 grain powder charge. The 5 grain powder charge really followed a nice trend line established by the previous 3 powder charges, or previous 2 powder charges, and so I chose 5.8 grains of unique. That's the method behind that madness. Now, the next step is to wait for spring. I like to shoot my PAC-T tests in at least 50-degree Fahrenheit ambient temperature conditions. Not so much for any of the target type of work that I'm doing, but particularly for the terminal ballistics in that clear ballistics gelatin. So, just got to wait a little bit. We'll be right back testing PAC-T out at the range. Hey folks, it is finally spring. Spring has sprung. We're 70 plus degrees out here, and I've been waiting for this so I can resume some of my PAC-T tests. That is, precision, accuracy, consistency, and terminal performance. It's the temperature that makes a difference on my terminal performance tests. You see, I'm using the clear ballistics ballistic gelatin, and I noticed that when it gets really cold outside, even 40, 45 degrees, that gel is noticeably more solid or rigid than when I'm shooting at a more warmer ambient temperatures. So we're at 70 plus degrees today. I think the first day we hit 70 this year. And so we are finally going to be testing the 90 grain spear gold dots in my 9mm pistols. I've got 3 pistols out today. We'll start with the Beretta Model 9 92FS. Then we'll jump over to the CZ75 Bravo and end up with the FNX 9mm pistols. I'm going to be shooting 5 rounds each at these bullseye targets right behind me, and I'm going to be recording those shots with the lab radar. That'll give us our consistency measurement. Then I'll be shifting over, and I'll put my ballistic gelatin on that table over there, and we'll put 1 round into the ballistic gelatin. I got some brand new gelatin now this year, same 20% NATO block. We'll put 1 round into it using the pistol that does best at the PAC part of the test. So I'm all ready to get started, and let's go. Let's get it going. I was expecting at least 1,400. That's where we're getting, 1,400 feet per second. We're clear. Recorded all 5, 17.7 feet per second standard deviation. Start a new series for the CZ75. Let's arm this. There we go, we're all set. Shooting at the target in the upper left. A long reset. There we go. There we go. We're clear. "19 feet per second standard deviation. And we got all 5 rounds also. Same 90 grain bullet. These are all my reloads. Reloaded as one session. This is going to be at the target on the right, upper tier on the right. A nice short reset. We're a little bit under 1400. It's a shorter barrel. We are clear. Doesn't seem like it liked the FN too much. I've got all my shots well pulled to the left. 15.5 feet per second standard deviation. Oh, it only recorded 4 of my rounds. That's interesting. I might have slid back. You know, if you've been watching our previous or any of our previous PAC-T episodes, whenever we were shooting, or I was shooting the 9mm, you might notice a trend that every time I do the tests with these 3 different pistols, the Beretta 92 always comes out on top. It's to the point now where I'm wondering if I should even bother shooting the CZ or the FN for these sorts of tests. The Beretta 92 is really an impressive pistol. In fact, that is the pistol, well, not the exact same pistol, but that's the pistol that I qualified expert with when I was in the military as military police. Kind of fun little bit of nostalgia there whenever I shoot that particular pistol. Well, let's look at the results from our tests. And we'll start off looking at the PAC, or Precision, Accuracy, and Consistency test. This is the target for the 5-shot group with the Beretta M9 or Model 92. It's a 1.237-inch extreme spread from outermost edge to outermost edge. When it's corrected for the size of the bullet and an accurate extreme spread, really, it is actually under 1 inch, 0.88 of an inch. And this was fired again at 15 yards. The score was 47 out of 50 with no hits in the exact bullseye. standard deviation on those muzzle velocities, the consistency part of that test, is about 18 feet per second. The second pistol that I shot was the CZ, and the CZ didn't do quite as well. It didn't do terrible on the group size. The first three actually did pretty well, but then they pulled, or I pulled. I think the rounds pulled to the right. It's very interesting that all three of these groups kind of impacted in different places on the paper. Anyway, this was a 2.34 inch extreme spread group, final measure there, and score of 43 out of 50, and also none in the dead bullseye. 19 feet per second standard deviation of those muzzle velocities. The FN, and this is actually a nice pistol. I actually like this pistol, the way it fits in the hand. Lots of very good ergodynamic qualities of this pistol, but it just once again did not really shoot that well as a group. I have a almost 5 3/4 inch group. Even if this one was a flyer or I pulled it somehow on that rest, this group here is still, fairly large. Certainly does not beat the Beretta M9. 16 feet per second standard deviation gives this one the win for the most consistent rounds. It had a score of only 28 out of 50, and of course none in the dead bullseye. Now one of the probably most important parts for me is the terminal performance part, and unfortunately, and this is very odd, this Speer Gold Dot expanded tremendously, pretty well. It completely flattened. Of course, it's not a very deep or long bullet to begin with. It completely flattened, and it started to fragment. We lost a petal here. We lost a few more in the gel. And it only penetrated 7.5 inches. And the other bad thing about it is that it only retained 60-some% of its overall weight, giving this one a final score of 305 points. Now, to put that 305 points into perspective, it's quite a ways out from the lead. In other words, there are quite a few better bullets for the 9mm than the 90 grain Speer Gold Dot. The best, in fact, is actually another Speer Gold Dot, and it's the 124 grain, which scored 380 points. Much, much better choice for the 9mm as a defensive pistol round. Now, talking about the Speer Gold Dot and these overall results, I'm starting to wonder if maybe I drove it at too high of a velocity. We were just about at 1,400 feet per second at only 7 yards in that ballistic gelatin, and it's very, very strange for Speer Gold Dots not to hold together. They're really a fantastic bullet. But this one flattened out almost like a pancake instead of a mushroom. It started losing petals, and it only penetrated 7.5 inches. Well, it was a fun test. It was definitely a fun test to do, a challenging test with that 90 grain bullet, trying to get it to load up very well with my reloading dies, working up the powder charge with Unique. Kind of a fun experiment, no doubt about it. I'm always up to that sort of challenge. But as far as a defensive round is concerned, there are better. And one thing that a person could say is that the 90 grain bullet doesn't have as much recoil. That could be the case, I guess. I don't really notice too much difference. What I do notice on these lighter 90 grain bullets is that the recoil is maybe not so much less, but it's different. It's much more maybe snappy and quick, I guess, compared to the 124 grain bullet. I haven't purposefully shot them side by side. Give me one Magnus load, all this stuff like this. I haven't done that. But I don't think that based on these results, I don't think that any of that will override the rest of the results. Terminal performance is very, very important. And as I said earlier, there are, again, better choices for the 9mm. And right now, I would go with the 124 grain Spear Gold Dot. Thanks once again for watching.